Some heroes clean floors instead of wearing medals, and some sacrifices remain hidden for decades. This emotional American story reveals how quiet kindness, buried courage, and a father's silent love can change lives in unexpected ways. Welcome to Valley of Kindness, where unseen heroes finally receive the respect they deserve. Ethan Cole woke before dawn in his small Norfolk apartment, the hum of the old refrigerator mixing with the distant sound of seagulls near the harbor. Graduation day had arrived, though he treated it like any other workday. He brewed cheap coffee, folded his janitor uniform neatly, and checked the envelope holding his son's invitation one last time. Pride warmed his chest, but he kept his expression calm, as if emotion were something best handled privately, behind closed doors. Raising Lucas alone had taught Ethan discipline of the heart. After Lucas's mother passed away when the boy was barely 6, grief became a constant companion. Ethan learned to pack lunches, attend parent-teacher meetings, and sit quietly during school performances where other families arrived in groups. He never complained. Love, he believed, was shown through consistency, not words, and Lucas never once went to bed hungry or unsure of his father's presence. Money was always tight, but dignity was never negotiable. Ethan took the janitor job at the local high school because it allowed him to be close to Lucas without intruding on his world. He worked nights, polishing floors long after students left, humming old military cadences under his breath. Few people noticed him, and he preferred it that way. Invisible men carried fewer questions, fewer expectations, and fewer reminders of who he used to be. The past lived quietly inside him, marked only by scars and a faded tattoo on his left arm. The anchor and eagle were once symbols of brotherhood and survival, but now they were just ink under worn skin. Ethan rarely rolled up his sleeves in public. The memories attached to that tattoo were heavy, filled with fire, sand, and screams he still heard in his dreams. Lucas, now 18, stood on the edge of adulthood without knowing the full weight of his father's history. He knew Ethan worked hard, that he had served a little in the military, and that he hated loud fireworks. Ethan never corrected the half-truths. He wanted his son's life to be lighter than his own, unburdened by stories of war and loss. Graduation morning moved slowly. Ethan arrived early, parking far from the entrance to avoid attention. Families gathered in clusters, laughing and taking photos. Ethan slipped inside quietly, nodding to a security guard who recognized him from nightly shifts. He chose a seat in the back row, close enough to see Lucas's face, but far enough to leave unnoticed once the ceremony ended. As the auditorium filled, Ethan watched parents beam with pride, holding banners and balloons. He kept his hands folded, breathing evenly. This moment wasn't about him. It was about Lucas stepping forward into a future he had earned through discipline and integrity. Ethan's chest tightened with pride, but he kept his gaze steady, refusing to let emotion overwhelm him. When the band began to play, Ethan wiped his forehead with his sleeve, forgetting for a moment about the tattoo. The fabric slid up just enough to expose the faded ink. He didn't notice. He was too focused on Lucas, who sat among his classmates in a crisp Navy ROTC uniform, shoulders squared, eyes bright with purpose. On stage, a Navy captain prepared to speak. Captain Richard Hale had addressed many graduations, but something about this one felt heavier. As his eyes scanned the audience, they caught a glimpse of something familiar in the back row. A tattoo. An anchor and eagle, worn and unmistakable. His breath caught. His prepared speech blurred as memory crashed into him like a wave. The heat of Fallujah flooded back. Smoke. Chaos. The sound of collapsing metal. Hale remembered being pinned under debris, convinced his life was ending. He remembered a strong hand gripping his vest, dragging him through fire while bullets screamed overhead. He remembered a voice telling him to stay awake, to breathe, to live. That voice belonged to a man who vanished after the mission. Captain Hale's hands trembled as he gripped the podium. He had spent years believing Sergeant Ethan Cole was dead. The military record listed him as missing, presumed killed in action. Hale had carried that loss through every promotion, every salute, every speech. And now, here he was, sitting quietly in the back, wearing a janitor's uniform, expecting nothing. The captain's voice cracked as he tried to continue, but emotion overwhelmed him. The audience shifted, confused. Ethan finally looked up, sensing something was wrong. Their eyes met. In that instant, recognition passed between them. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, a silent plea forming without words. Please, let this moment be about my son. But some truths refused to stay buried. Captain Hale stepped away from the microphone, ignoring protocol, ignoring whispers. Each step toward the back row felt surreal. He stopped in front of Ethan and raised a trembling hand in salute. The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan stood slowly, instinctively returning the salute, his face calm but eyes filled with understanding. Hale's voice broke as he spoke quietly. "You saved my life." Tears streamed freely now, unashamed. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his arm, shaking his head slightly, urging restraint. But the weight of years pressed too hard. Hale turned to the audience, his voice carrying truth that demanded to be heard. He spoke of courage without cameras, of sacrifice without medals, of a man who carried wounded soldiers out of fire and then disappeared into anonymity. He spoke of leadership defined not by rank, but by choice. Every word peeled back layers of Ethan's quiet life, revealing a hero hidden beneath a janitor's uniform. Lucas watched, frozen. The world tilted as understanding dawned. His father wasn't just a man who worked nights and came home tired. He was a soldier, a rescuer, a survivor who chose obscurity so his son could have peace. Tears blurred Lucas's vision, as pride unlike anything he had known filled his chest. Ethan wanted to shrink back into the shadows, but the applause rose like thunder, unstoppable. For once, he didn't walk away unseen. He stood there, imperfect, humble, and whole, watching his son see him fully for the first time. And in that moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. Ethan remained standing as the applause slowly faded, his hands feeling heavier than they ever had on any battlefield. The noise of the auditorium blurred into a distant hum, while his thoughts raced back and forth between past and present. He had survived explosions, gunfire, and loss, yet nothing had prepared him for being seen so completely. He glanced toward Lucas, whose eyes were fixed on him with a mixture of shock, pride, and confusion. Ethan's heart tightened. This moment, unavoidable now, would reshape everything between them. Captain Hale gently lowered his salute and took a step back, allowing Ethan space. The administration stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or honor what had just unfolded. The crowd, once restless, now watched in reverent silence. Ethan cleared his throat, wanting to disappear, but the weight of truth pressed forward. He had spent years teaching Lucas honesty through actions rather than stories, and now silence felt like another kind of lie. Lucas stood from his seat, his graduation cap nearly slipping as he moved. He walked toward his father slowly, each step uncertain, as if approaching someone both familiar and newly discovered. When he reached Ethan, words failed him. He simply wrapped his arms around his father, holding on tightly. Ethan closed his eyes, resting his chin lightly on his son's head, breathing in the moment he had unknowingly feared and longed for all these years. The embrace stirred memories Ethan had buried deep. Nights when Lucas cried quietly after his mother's death. Mornings when Ethan left for work before sunrise and returned long after homework was done. He remembered choosing janitorial shifts over higher-paying jobs because they allowed him flexibility to be present when it mattered. Every choice had been deliberate, every sacrifice quiet. He never wanted Lucas to grow up in the shadow of war stories or hero labels. Captain Hale stepped back to the podium, his voice steadier now but still heavy with emotion. He spoke not of medals or missions, but of character. He told the graduates that leadership was often invisible, that true strength rarely demanded attention. His eyes returned often to Ethan, not as a superior officer, but as a man honoring another. The message settled deeply into the room, reshaping what success looked like for many listening. When the ceremony resumed, Lucas walked across the stage differently. His posture was the same, but his heart carried new weight. As his name was called, he glanced toward the back row. Ethan gave him a small nod, the same quiet encouragement he had offered before every exam, every setback, every achievement. Lucas smiled through tears, understanding that this nod carried more history than he could yet fully grasp. After the ceremony, families flooded the aisles. Congratulations echoed everywhere, but many people paused when they reached Ethan. Some offered handshakes, others simply nodded with respect. Ethan accepted each gesture politely, though discomfort lingered beneath his calm. Attention had never been his goal. Still, he realized that refusing acknowledgement entirely would dishonor the very values he had lived by. Lucas and Ethan stepped outside into the warm Virginia sunlight. The air felt lighter, yet charged with unspoken questions. They walked in silence to the parking lot, just as they had so many times before. It was Lucas who finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Ethan stopped walking, choosing his words carefully, as he always had. "I wanted you to be free," Ethan said. "Free from fear, from expectations, from carrying my past." He explained that war had taken enough from their family already. He wanted Lucas to define himself without comparison or pressure. Lucas listened, nodding slowly, realizing that the absence of stories had been its own form of protection. They sat in the car for a long moment, neither rushing to leave. Lucas asked about the tattoo, about the men Ethan served with, about the day in Fallujah. Ethan answered honestly but gently, careful not to glorify violence. He spoke of brotherhood, responsibility, and the cost of survival. He admitted that walking away from the military had been harder than staying, but choosing peace had been necessary. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly through the community. Ethan's co-workers treated him with new respect, though he asked them to keep things normal. Lucas prepared to leave for his own Navy journey, now carrying a deeper understanding of service. Father and son talked more openly, their bond strengthened by truth rather than shattered by it. On Lucas's last night at home before basic training, Ethan handed him a small box. Inside was a simple metal bracelet engraved with a single word: integrity. Ethan explained that titles fade, uniforms change, but character remains. Lucas hugged his father tightly, understanding that this was the greatest inheritance he could receive. When Lucas left the next morning, Ethan returned to work as usual. He cleaned hallways, emptied trash cans, and greeted students with quiet kindness. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer needed to hide. His life had come full circle, not through recognition, but through the knowledge that his greatest mission had succeeded. And somewhere on a Navy base far away, Lucas stood a little taller, carrying his father's legacy not as a burden, but as a compass guiding him forward.